Now, here are Morgan Streetman and Roxanne Wilder.
Well, hello there, gentlemen. Here we are on a Monday after a very sad, distressful, devastating weekend for our country. I mean, I don't even know where.
Do you guys remember something called coronavirus?
What's that?
Right. What happened to coronavirus?
And what happened to a lot of stories? I mean, it doesn't it feel like we've just been on a roller coaster of sort of like they're leading us from story to story.
I was afraid that civil unrest was going to happen.
Yeah.
But not this way.
You thought so, Pat, on Friday when you and I talked before we left this building.
And not as bad as it did. I thought there'd be a little bit, but not as bad.
Well, it's a real bad situation, and
it's ongoing.
It's ongoing. I mean, I think we're going to see more of it, and there may be some reason to believe that this is part of a plan. And certainly these protesters are well prepared. And what do I mean by that? You see some of the videos, and you see that they have these water stations for the protesters. And you see, dozens of cases of water. They've got, other supplies and things that are, I'm assuming, brought by some kind of truck to a location, and it's kind of set up as a station for the protesters so they can come and get water, and they can, wash their eyes out from if they've been gassed and things like that. So, I mean, you see that there's some kind of an organized effort to support these protesters. And, of course, we got to be – I mean, this is such a nuanced conversation, and the truth is I kind of wanted to put off getting into it until just a little bit later in the show because we do have some other things to talk about. It's the kind of conversation that once you start talking about it, it just takes over the whole show. So, we do have some things to tell you about, but one of the things I was going to say is, we really need to draw distinctions, and that's something that's not being done in the media very well, at least. We need to draw distinctions between the protesters and the rioters. We need to draw distinctions between people. I mean, we can't get into this situation of constantly lumping people together into groups and saying, the way that you respond or feel about something puts you in a group. And if you don't respond or feel about it the way that I want you or think you should respond or feel about it, you become the enemy. We saw these signs that says silence is violence. And we could go on and on about that topic because there's a lot there to unpack, including looking back at the civil rights movement in this country and how these topics were dealt with then, but also remembering where we are. So that's a conversation that we're going to try to at least talk about today. I don't think we're probably going to get through the entire conversation or any of us are going to get to, give you an answer or say all the things that we think and feel about it, but we'll try to talk about it some. But before we get into that, one of the topics that I wanted to just touch on, take a quick look back at something, and that is take a quick look back at what's going on in the Flynn case, because there are things developing in a bunch of areas right now. One of the areas is the Flynn case. If you'll remember, the judge in the Flynn case, the trial judge, Judge Emmett Sullivan, had put in an order allowing for amicus briefs to be filed, and then he actually appointed an amicus to represent, and we talked about this on the show last week some, but to represent the interests of some unknown third party. I don't know what those interests are because you've got the government, you've got Michael Flynn's counsel, and they're all on the same page. They say the charges should be dismissed. But the judge said, I want to hear from another side. I want to hear from somebody who will say that the charges should not be dismissed. So he appointed this former federal judge, John Gleeson, to represent that point of view to the court. Now, this is really unprecedented. This is not the way things are supposed to work in a criminal case. And so what General Flynn's lawyer, Sidney Powell, did, who I've had the pleasure of meeting not so long ago, but what she did was she filed a brief to the appellate court for a writ of mandamus. And I told you last week that's an extraordinary writ that basically allows the appellate court to come in and direct the trial court as to what it has to do. So if the trial court's doing something outside of its jurisdiction, outside of its power, something that it's not allowed to do, the appellate court can come in and say, stop and do this or do something different. The appellate court can essentially direct the trial court as to what it has to do. And so that's what Sidney Powell did. And then a couple of days later, we saw an order come down from the appellate court saying to Judge Sullivan, explain yourself. And that was on May 21st of last month, obviously. We're now at June 1st. So today is the day, right? Today is the first non-weekend day following that order. They gave him 10 days to explain himself, the judge. And, of course, he hired counsel last week. Now, that also is unprecedented. I don't want to spend a ton of time talking about it, but that also is unprecedented. Who is the counsel representing, right? Is the counsel representing the judge individually? Is the counsel representing the court? It just doesn't make a lot of sense. We don't see this type of behavior from federal judges. The judge has been ordered to explain himself. He should be able to do it if he really has a reason other than, what many suspect may be his reason, which is just continuing the resistance against President Trump and, continuing to try to make General Flynn look like he did something wrong. And the truth is, now that the transcripts have come out about General Flynn's call with the Russian ambassador, he didn't do anything wrong. He actually didn't talk. He didn't raise the issue of the sanctions with the Russian ambassador. The Russian ambassador raised it with him. And Flynn didn't say, don't do anything. He just said, please just, if you could make your response proportional, and then, we will be coming in as the new administration and we'll try to address this with you. So he didn't say don't do anything, which is what the media narrative has been, that General Flynn said, don't do anything, new administration coming in, we're going to take a different course. What he said was just don't escalate the situation, and that's very clear. Just make your response. I understand you probably have to respond. Just make it proportional, and, we're a new administration coming in, and we will address the issues with you. And so, that and there's some question, I guess the basic question that the FBI asked him was, did you discuss it with him on the call? But is that how they actually asked it, or did they say, did you raise it with him? I mean, who knows exactly what was said in that conversation, because all we've got is the FBI 302 after the fact to tell us. But the big picture story is that, General Flynn didn't do anything wrong. He was forced to plead to something because they were threatening his son with criminal charges. And now the FBI has done its own, and the Department of Justice has done its own investigation with a U.S. attorney brought in from Missouri to look at everything. And that U.S. attorney has recommended that the charges be dropped. And that's what the department went with. And now the judge is essentially saying you can't drop those. Well, today is the day. Today is the day that the judge has got to file his response to the order from the D.C. Circuit directing him to explain himself. And I'm going to be curious to see what that says. I'm going to be curious to see if he asks for an extension of time, if the lawyer comes in and says, I just got retained, a week ago. I need more time to analyze this. I don't think that would be a wise move. I don't think the appellate court is going to give him more time, but we'll see what happens. So today is the day. So we look forward to seeing that. Some news on the same story that happened just last week was Dana Boente, a longtime FBI and Department of Justice lawyer. He's got about a 40-year career. And he was currently the head legal counsel for the general counsel for the FBI itself. He was asked for his resignation last week. Now, we know that he was involved in this whole setup, part and parcel of the whole deal. So the interesting thing is that request for his resignation didn't come from FBI Director Christopher Wray, who we understand is also now on the hot seat. But that request came from, and all the media is telling us, is somebody high up at the Justice Department.
So a good guess would be maybe Barr?
Maybe Bill Barr. Maybe things are really starting to happen. I think the coup plotters, I think the resistance movement, at least with respect to the General Flynn thing, has really overplayed their hand by continuing to fight this tooth and nail, by continuing to resist letting General Flynn off of these charges that never should have been brought against him. I think they've caused the people that are looking into it to look into it further and to get more familiar with the facts and to get a stronger conclusion that this never should have happened in this way. So it's going to be a very interesting few weeks. I mean, I hope it doesn't get lost in the news because there's a lot going on, as we all know right now, and certainly some news that seems to be more important, at least at this time. And we're going to talk about that during the show today. But we also had some other news when our local interest segment, which I don't know if you got to watch it. I mean, I tried to go out on the roof and watch it on Saturday, but unfortunately...
Did you see a trail of smoke?
I couldn't see it. The storm clouds were not cooperating. And you'd have to have pretty clear skies to see all the way across the other side of the state.
Did you see the docking?
I did. And thank goodness we've got computers to handle all that for us, you know. You just kind of push a button and the computer takes care of it for us. I certainly wouldn't want to be piloting that thing up in space. We've got a lot more to talk about.
Welcome back to the Morgan Streetman Show. Again, a tough day, a sad day for our country as we're looking around and seeing everything that's happening. And we enjoy this show because we get a chance to delve into some of these other topics that the mainstream media doesn't cover as much. But this story is such a big story. And so we have to look at it now and see what's gone wrong. Why is this happening? When is it going to stop? I remember when I first saw that video of George Floyd and what happened to him, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I'm like, is this even real? Is this, you know, and so what makes me saddest with all of this is I do really believe that everybody is on the same page. Everybody's on the same page about that police brutality. It has to stop.
Yeah.
It shouldn't have happened. And yet, look at how far apart people are behaving.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think Dr. King would feel today?
How do you think they'd feel?
I feel he felt like he didn't accomplish too much.
Well,
it does feel like we're traveling backwards.
One step forward,
Yes.
3 steps back.
you know, what's interesting is that I remember back during the presidential election in 2008, and there was essentially a promise that was made to people, and that is we're finally about to get past racial division in this country. And I know a lot of people, particularly white people, felt like voting for an African-American, a black president. And, of course, Barack Obama was white and black. I mean, he had both parents. And so it's, you know, when you start to look at race, it's like, what is race? I mean, are we stuck back in a period where, you know, like it used to be, where if you had a drop of black blood or African-American blood in you, that you were black, no matter, you know, I mean, so and what does it even matter, right? What does it even matter whether somebody's white or black? I mean, that is how I sort of start to look at it, is fundamentally we need to kind of challenge some of these assumptions that it's the most important thing, that somehow your entire personhood comes from this racial identity. I think that's totally wrong. And anyway, the point is, I think we were moving away from that. I thought we were reasonably well past it, but you know, some people would say, well, that's just because you have privilege, because you're white and you don't appreciate it. And I want to be really careful here, because it is somewhat true that I've had a different experience, although not all of my interactions with law enforcement have always been positive. And I'm not a sort of state power authoritarian guy. I'm not a fan of that. I'm more of a libertarian, freedom-minded guy. So I'm generally against the over-exercise of state power that I think we've seen in our country over a long period. But, you know, leaving that aside, I mean, I do have some understanding that, you know, if you're growing up black in this country, you know, there are discussions that your dad would have with you, or your uncle or your grandfather, or somebody in your family, your mother, somebody's going to tell you, son or daughter, if you get pulled over by the police, you know, you need to be really careful because bad things can happen. And I don't remember ever having that conversation had to be had with me. You know, there was never this sort of overarching thought process that, you know, you really need to be careful with the police. So I know there's something different about the way people are experiencing their interactions with law enforcement. And at the same time, you know, that's not the entirety of the story. That's not the entirety of the story. So what I think we've got to do as people when we're looking at this and we're talking about these issues is try to shy away from generalizing, because that's really working against us, where we say, you know, all police are bad. And we know that's not true. I mean, that just defies even logic. It's the same thing as saying all white people are bad or all black people are bad. That just simply can't be true. There's got to be at least one or two good people. And of course, that's not even doing it justice because there's a lot of good people in each of these communities. In fact, probably the vast majority of the people in each of these groups that we want to break people down into, black, white, police, not police, whatever groups the majority of the people in those groups are going to be basically good and decent people. And that's basically what we have throughout our country is good and decent people. Now, there are always going to be people who defy that categorization and who are bad people. And that's going to be in every group that you have across the spectrum. So, but that video to me of George Floyd being killed there on the sidewalk was so sad, I mean, that's really the overarching feeling that I had, just how sad it was to see a man begging for his life. I mean, he's fully restrained. I couldn't think of any justification. I don't understand when you've got somebody zip tied and their hands are handcuffed and you got their legs zip tied. I mean, I don't understand how you can continue to sit on their neck or sit on their back. And what are you accomplishing by that except for potentially killing them?
I can't believe that all four officers thought the same, that it was okay to do that. That just shows you how strong that thin blue line is, that you don't want to go against your partner. Mm-hmm. Where I talked to my partner over the weekend, mm-hmm. and I said, before I talked to him, I told some friends, I'd have pushed the guy off.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And my partner, when he called me, goes, I'd have pushed the guy off.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Why is that? Why didn't that happen with those three other people who were there?
Because you don't want to go against your partner. You don't want to go against your partner there, but there comes a time, you have to at least say, he's telling you can't breathe. Can you just move your knee to his back?
Right.
Or why did they put him in the car? It's just so blind, that thin blue line, how strong it is, that's got to end. The training and the academies and things like that have got to say, when you see something wrong, you mm-hmm. got to stop that.
Yeah,
mm-hmm.
yeah. Well, think about if this hadn't happened, how much destruction of property, how many lives, because other people have died in these riots. I mean, we've seen it. I mean, I saw a guy getting drug around by a FedEx truck that he was apparently, when you say a FedEx truck, you're talking about a big, double 18-wheeler type, it's probably more than 18-wheeler, but, it's got, 2 trailers attached to it. And, I think that FedEx truck driver was scared to death. I don't know if folks remember the L.A. riots after Rodney King and mm-hmm. the Reginald Denny mm-hmm. situation where a truck driver was driving through. His truck kind of got mobbed. He stopped. They pulled him out of his truck and bashed his head in with a brick. I mean, he's never been the same. I mean, had major brain injury from that occurrence. And he's lucky to have survived, as are many people that were around during these riots over the weekend are lucky that they survived. I saw several incidents. I saw a guy in Salt Lake City pull a bow and arrow out of his car, and he got mobbed. Of course, you got to question the sanity of somebody who goes into a situation like this and tries to involve themselves directly. That's not smart. In fact, the only sane thing to do at this point, in my opinion, is stay home. Try to mm-hmm. stay out of it. Mm-hmm. And I know that's what I tried to do. I had some friends that were riding around, taking videos and just trying to see what was going on. But you understand you're putting yourself into a terrible, terrible, dangerous situation that could, escalate in one direction or another very quickly. And so, but when we look at what's going on, the rioting and everything else, maybe it would have been better. Maybe these police officers would have protected more and served more if they would have turned around and tackled Derek Chauvin off of Floyd and said, knock it off, man. He's restrained, or even just pulled him off. I mean, what's he going to do, punch his partner? So just mm-hmm. pull him off the guy. But everybody that I know that saw that video is horrified by it. And that cannot be allowed to happen. At the same time, it's not the only time somebody's been killed. It's not the only time somebody's been killed unjustly, and it's not the only time somebody's been killed by the police. This has happened many, many times, and it hasn't been restricted. As much as the media is trying to push that narrative onto us, it hasn't been restricted to just one race. The plain and simple fact is that all kinds of people have been killed by the police. I don't know that it's the epidemic that they're trying to tell us it is, because, I mean, I heard some of these protesters talking, I heard some 15-year-old kid supposedly saying that, you know, children like me die all the time from police violence, and I mean, that's just not true. It's just not true. Does it happen? Yeah, it happens, but it's not an absolute, I was going to say epidemic, and then I'm like, well, you know, epidemic, we're going to be overusing that word again. And we've lost control of our language in the way that we discuss these things as well, because, you know, and that's kind of what I alluded to earlier with this concept of some of the signs that I see that says silence is violence. You know, and it's not. I mean, silence is silence, and you can judge that how you want, but violence is violence, and you cannot equate the two, because then what you say is, okay, well, if you've been silent and you've been violent to me, now I can be violent back towards you.
You know, one of the biggest things is all they're saying is F the system. Mm-hmm. F the system. You know, what is, I mean, we know what the system is, but has it changed? Does it need to be changed? Is that the problem?
Well, is it the system is the problem, or is it? It's hard to know. I mean, here we are. You know, we're going back to generalizing. I mean, we've got to have some degree of law and order. We've got to have a civil society. We've got to have a force. We've got to have a system. We've got to have a force that can go out and catch criminals and stop them. We can't just let criminals run wild in this country like they do in other countries. Not all countries, but some other countries, you know, and it's a terrible situation. And then the law-abiding people become prisoners of that situation. So, you know, so much more here to unpack. It's hard to even deal with it, and I know I'm just sad. I'm just really sad about our country.
Welcome back to the Morgan Streetman Show. I have to tell you, gentlemen, that yesterday, oh my gosh, I was just so sad. I was devastated, and you know, you just brought up a great point, Morgan. How do we converse about this? How are we able to get to a point of solutions and make this world a better place? And there's part of me that I just throw my hands up and I say, I give up. Yeah. I give up. Yeah. I have no hope for adults. But then I think about kids. They don't deserve any of this.
Right.
My children, I mean, obviously I have a baby. One of them's an infant, but they don't know skin color. That's not something that they know anything about. And they don't. It's just, they shouldn't have to deal with this.
Well, I think we've all got to be so careful about being drawn into this conflict because, you know, one of the things that appears to me is that there is an effort to divide and conquer our country. That seems clear to me that these protests have some kind of planning behind them. I'm not saying the entire incident was planned long ago, but I mean, who knows, right? Stranger things have happened than that protests have been created and riots have been created in various countries. I mean, we've done that ourselves in other countries to destabilize them. But, you know, some of the interesting things that I've heard about and seen about with some videos, which is, you know, a lot of these peaceful protesters will be in certain areas and they'll say, wait a minute, why is there a pallet of bricks on this street? Because there's no construction going on. Have you seen the videos, Pat? You gave me a surprise look there.
I've not seen that.
Okay,
That's
well,
been
these
showing
are
up.
Yeah, there've been pallets of bricks on these streets in these really high-end retail areas where there's no ongoing construction. Somebody has dropped off pallets of bricks
with a forklift.
With a truck. These didn't come off a pickup truck. It would be too much weight for a pickup truck. So somebody's brought in bricks for these protests. Just like somebody's brought in water and food and these supply stations and everything else, somebody's paid for the bus tickets, the plane tickets to ship these people from all around the country. What's going on here is the terrorist organization Antifa has mobilized, and they've taken over this situation to, again, try and drive a wedge between people, try and divide and conquer. And who's behind Antifa ultimately? I mean, we don't know, but, you know, look at people like George Soros and look at his style of taking countries down and funding this divide and conquer strategy. And is that what we're seeing here? Are we really seeing this idea that there is, you know, this thing that happened with George Floyd where he was murdered on the sidewalk, you know, has now turned into something else? And now it's not really about that anymore. It's about trying to create racial division in this country. And all you got to do is watch the news and listen to what some of these commentators were saying. You know, we had some clips. We really don't have time to play them all. And some of them are pretty offensive. But, you know, there's clear statements coming out from what are, commentators and authority figures that are trying to drive a wedge between black people and white people in this country. They're saying all white people are bad or all white people are racist or silence is violence. That is just not true. All the people that I talk to, white and black, are all horrified by what happened to George Floyd. I mean, horrified. People, and they can't process why didn't the other police officers pull him off of his neck? But this situation is being taken and it's being used for other purposes. And you made a point at the beginning, Pat George, which is, does anybody remember coronavirus? Well, before that, does anybody remember impeachment? Well, before that, does anybody remember Russia? I mean, the media has a habit of just changing our attention, and they're sort of directing us. There used to be an old saying that, a man is the head of the household or head of the relationship, but a woman is the neck. And that was something women used to say, well, and men too, but, it was kind of like, haha, yeah, the man's in charge, but I tell the man what to look at. So he's in charge, but I actually kind of am in charge. And that's cool. I mean, that probably is true. I don't know. I don't have a neck right now, so I don't know. But let's say that's true. Well, the media is our neck. They're sort of swiveling us around. Oh, look at this over here. Or look at that over there. And we've got all of these cities burning. We've got all this destruction of monuments, of buildings. We've got all this vandalism. U.S.
Embassy in London this morning.
Yeah, it's out of control. But this is this is a criminal conspiracy that's going on right now, I believe. The planning is too good. The funding is too good. And, Attorney General William Barr came out on Saturday, and I hope we see this, and I think we will start to see this week. I think we're going to see, because we know who the leadership of Antifa is, and we know who the funding sources are. And with all the tracking that we can do through the smart devices, we can get to all that information. So I hope that the Department of Justice starts to act on this quickly. We've got to quell these riots. And like I said, it's important. It's so important that we make distinctions. I mean, there are legitimate protests. There are legitimate reasons to protest. People are constitutionally, they have a right to assemble to petition the government for a redress of their grievances. So that's interpreted to mean they have a right to these public assemblies for protest. And as long as they're nonviolent, I'm all for it. I think that's important. And that's a message that needs to get out there. But what happens is usually late at night, the protesters go home and there's a core group of rioters that show up. And they're the ones that are causing a lot of the trouble. And they're criminal opportunists. And they're also people who are communist revolutionaries who want to take down the system, who want to burn the country down for the sake of building a new country. You can read in their writings, you can read about this. But Attorney General Barr came out on Saturday, and this wasn't covered widely, but I'd like to play for you his statement because I think it's indicative. He's not a man given to a lot of hyperbole. If you notice, he's sort of understated in the way he talks about things. But I think we're going to start to see criminal enforcement done by the Department of Justice this week against the Antifa leadership and the funding sources throughout the country and throughout the world.
Good afternoon. The greatness of our nation comes from our commitment to the rule of law. The outrage of our national community about what happened to George Floyd in Minneapolis is real and legitimate. Accountability for his death must be addressed and is being addressed through the regular process of our criminal justice system, both at the state and at the federal level. That system is working and moving at exceptional speed. Already, initial charges have been filed by the state. That process continues to move forward, and justice will be served. Unfortunately, with the rioting that is occurring in many of our cities around the country, the voices of peaceful protest are being hijacked by violent radical elements. Groups of outside radicals and agitators are exploiting the situation to pursue their own separate and violent agenda. In many places, it appears the violence is planned, organized, and driven by anarchic and left extremist groups, far left extremist groups, using Antifa-like tactics, many of whom travel from outside the state to promote the violence. We must have law and order on our streets and in our communities, and it is the responsibility of the local and state leadership in the first instance to halt this violence. The Department of Justice, including the FBI, the U.S. Marshals, the ATF, the DEA, and our 93 United States U.S. Attorney's offices around the country are supporting these local efforts. We'll continue to support them and take all action necessary to enforce federal law. In that regard, it is a federal crime to cross state lines or to use interstate facilities to incite or participate in violent rioting, and we will enforce those laws. Thank you.
So that was his statement. And, I think it's important that we recognize he's not nobody is minimizing what happened to George Floyd. He said the people who are upset about that is legitimate to be upset about what happened to George Floyd. And that's how everybody that I've spoken to feels strongly. I've yet to run into a person who said, something about Floyd that other than what happened to him is terrible, and those police officers need to be held accountable for that through the process. But again, we've got to separate that from the rioters. We've got to separate that from the people who, long before anything happened to George Floyd, they had a value system that they want to destroy this country because, in their mind, the capitalist system is evil, this country is evil, and they want to bring it down through violent revolution. And these people, they're real people. These are the people, the fist. That's like I forget the young man's name at Parkland, but how he did his fist. This is the symbolism of the radical, if we want to call it the radical left, radical communists, the ones who want to incite some kind of revolution in this country. And they're very good at propaganda. They're good at naming groups. So they've named a group Black Lives Matter. But, that's actually a group that's involved in some of these issues. That is actually a revolutionary type group. Now, it's hard because they're so good at naming, they're so good at manipulating us. You can't be against that, right? And I don't think anybody is against that, Black Lives Matter. Now, we need to have a discussion about how we pursue that. That we try to fix our existing system and we stop these things like what's happened to George Floyd from happening again. But we'll never be able to eliminate it totally. Let's face it, the system is full of people and people are flawed. And sometimes they behave in ways that, the rest of us wish that they didn't. And that's going to keep happening. And, of course, like the point I made earlier, tried to make, and I think this is one that you need to look into, and that is that this isn't limited to the black community. Police brutality is not limited to the black community. Now, I don't believe that police brutality is one of the great overarching problems that our society is facing in terms of overall magnitude. I think it's there, but I don't think it's as big as some of the other problems that we have to deal with. That doesn't mean we don't have to deal with it, right? It doesn't mean it's not wrong. It's just, is that the primary driving force of all of our civic thought, is we've got to eliminate police brutality. But I wanted to bring to you a story that wasn't much reported on at the time and still isn't much reported on today, and that is the story of Tony Timpa, who was a mentally ill man in Dallas who called the police, and the police, he was a white man, and the police came out, and they wound up arresting him, putting him on the ground. He had both his hands behind his back in zip ties. He had his legs zip tied, and they proceeded to sit with their knee in the middle of his back and hold him down, and literally, and he was saying the same things that George Floyd was saying, I can't breathe. And literally, they suffocated him on the ground. He died there. And there's currently an ongoing federal lawsuit. The only reason we know about this is as part of that lawsuit, because this happened back in 2016, but as part of that lawsuit, just last summer, the federal court ordered that the police body cams be released, and in those you could very clearly see them suffocate Tony Timpa on the ground in Dallas. And he wasn't even thought to have done anything wrong or committed a crime. He's the one that called the police. Think about that.
Okay, we're talking off air and we got to get back to the show here, but this has been a bit of an opportunity for us to talk because we're mourning, we're sad, looking around at what's happening and trying to find answers. And I think the important thing is for people to have conversations. Well,
I know one of the conversation I've been having with some of my friends is just to, because I still haven't gotten past just being sad about what happened to George Floyd, but also sad about what's happening now to our country, how that incident that occurred in Minneapolis, which is so wrong, is now creating so many more wrong incidences throughout the whole country. I mean, we see protesters and it's hard because the media constantly telling you protesters. But the truth is that the people that we're talking about are the rioters. And so there's some confusion of language that's going on. And this is part of the brainwashing and the programming that the media engages in. And I hope the rest of you can see this. I hope you see what's being done to us as we're being turned against each other. But the rioters in D.C. who were trying to overrun the White House, who were battling with the Secret Service, were burning churches, famous historic churches in D.C. If they could have gotten to the White House, they would have burned it. Churches and monuments and things being burned all around this country. Here in Tampa, we had very serious riots up in the University Square Mall area up near USF, which is, for those that aren't from Tampa, kind of North Tampa area. And, in fact, they looted and burned a Champs sporting goods store. Now, I mean, what do you think is going to happen? I mean, how are these, we've heard about things like food deserts in the inner city where there just aren't stores available for people. Are there going to be business owners that want to move into these areas and put their stores there when this is the kind of risk that they're running?
They went into a one-owner fish market in that same area.
Mm-hmm.
They went in and destroyed the coolers, just smashed the coolers and everything apart, ripped the tops off the lids, and then took the fish out and just threw them on the ground.
Oh.
Mm. It's crazy.
Why? I mean, just destruction for the sake of destruction. Just destruction because I'm angry about something. I don't even think these people
hate the
really.
System.
Yeah, and let's burn it all down. And you heard that from the rioters repeatedly about this concept of burning it all down. That's not going to be good for anybody. Destroying our system, destroying our country. It's not going to benefit the communities that are saying that they're underserved or being treated wrong. It's going to make it worse, and it's going to make it worse for everybody. It's destruction. There's no positive spin to it, and it's this revolutionary attack.
Mm-hmm. On another station here, actually, it's on 1010 as well, but the PSA show that we do here, we have a lot of conversations with people from University Area CDC, and I know how hard they work and members of that community work to make it a better place. And I can't imagine how devastating it is to see this happen.
They just remodeled University Square Mall.
I know.
Well, and we know what trouble the malls and retail is having.
In general, right.
We're just coming through this pandemic that's destroying our retail buying, destroying our consumer culture. And, the future does not bode well with a lot of these things that are happening. And I just hope we can get on top of this. I hope we can quell these riots. I hope that it doesn't devolve further. I hear people. I mean, the problem is that we've all got to rise, but we've all got to learn to turn the other cheek.
It's going to be a long, hot summer.
It's going to be a tough summer. And particularly if they're really smart.
There's a song about that.
Yeah.
I work on Q105, Morgan. Cruel Summer.
See, it was not coming immediately to my mind because I don't have a job on the music
80s
radio.
And more music. Yes.
But so there are so many things with this. It's so hard to discuss. I mean, we've got to find a solution. But I would circle us back to a concept that my friend David Gurnosky was talking about, and he's got a radio show called The Neighbor's Choice. And it's this concept of rising above, turning the other cheek. And we've got to get to that point. And it's got to happen on all sides. We cannot escalate. We cannot return violence for violence. If we do, this is going to dissolve into a lot more serious episodes of violence than what we've already seen. And I just hope we get on top of this quickly, and I hope the Department of Justice moves quickly, and I hope they arrest some of the leadership and funding sources for these riots. and somehow we can quell this, rising tide of violence. For our Out There segment, this is first of all, the whole show is based, this is kind of an out there period in our country right now, just coming through this pandemic, which in and of itself was, out there for us, and particularly the way that it was dealt with by our country, because we've had epidemics before in this country and they weren't dealt with in quite the same way. So, but now coming into this situation of the violence, something that has occurred to me, and I did not know this, but it's now been reported on, some details in it, but something that has occurred to me is just something doesn't seem right about the George Floyd story. And I want to be really careful, because in no way do I want to point a finger of blame at George Floyd. That's not at all what I'm trying to say. But what I'm trying to say is that something's wrong with the story. Even when you watch Derek Chauvin sitting on his neck with a cold, dead look in his eyes as he looked at the guys filming him, I mean, what was going on there? And now we have come to find out, although it hasn't been widely reported, that these two people knew each other and knew each other for possibly a long time. So is there not more to this story? Is there not something else going on here? Now, we don't even want to begin to speculate what that might be. But if you're curious and you say, wait a minute, I haven't heard this doesn't make any sense, let me just play you a real short clip of the Floyd family attorney, Ben Crump, when he was asked over the weekend, I think it was on Face the Nation, whether or not George Floyd and Derek Chauvin knew each other. And his response, you got to listen for a little bit because he doesn't immediately respond, but just listen to the clip when he's asked the question and then his ultimate response. He says they did.
Did the two
We don't
know
understand
each other?
how that is not first-degree murder. We don't understand how all these officers have not been arrested. And yes, his family has been notified by the owner of a club that Derek Chauvin was an off-duty police officer while George Floyd was a security guard. And so they had to overlap. And so that is going to be an interesting aspect to this case, and hopefully upgrading these charges to first-degree murder, because we believe he knew who George Floyd was.
So the owner of this club, Maria Santa Maria, I think is her name, she's come out and said George Floyd was he was a bouncer. He was inside security. Derek Chauvin was outside off-duty police officer. Derek Chauvin was there for 17 years at this club, El Nuevo Rodeo, the new rodeo. Again, we don't want to go too far into speculating. I'm sure you can all do speculating on your own there at home. But there's something more to this story than what appears just in the media. And the fact that these two guys knew each other, there's a lot more there to be unpacked. I'm Morgan Streetman, and that's the way I see it. Thank you for listening to the Morgan Streetman Show. We hope you enjoyed what you heard, and if you did, please click like and subscribe to help us out. And remember that we recommend that you exercise your brain at least once a week.